Hello, Sue here. Welcome to another one of my videos on how to paint a watercolour dog. Just using 4 colours here, which I'll go into in a bit more detail later, and Arch's 300-gram rough paper, which I've masking taped here. It's quite a heavy paper, so it copes with just being masking taped down, and I've got it on a harder cardboard board so that it doesn't lift up. This is the paper I'm using, Grain Torchen Rough. It's 300 grams. It's a good quality paper. And this is the photo that I'm going to be using to paint my dog. So I always have it up on the laptop next to me. Sometimes I paint from my phone, but because I was recording it on my phone, I'm using the laptop. I've got a couple of paintbrushes that I use. There's this one, which is a number 6 pointed wash Rowney brush, and this is my favourite, which is a sword brush. It's a 1/4 inch graduate sword brush. Both of them are good value. They won't break the bank, and I think they're both synthetic. And these are the paints I'm using. It's a pack of 36, a set of 36 from the St. Petersburg White Knights set, which is very good. The other thing that I always have to hand is a paper towel, which I usually have on my lap, and that's if I want to, if I make any errors, then I can use a clean, damp brush. I've used to mop up some of the water, the colour with the paper towel, and that's pretty important as well. So here I've outlined the dog. I've actually cheated. I've traced the dog from the computer screen. I can draw, but limited on time, and I'd rather spend my time painting, to be honest. So what's a good tip is to project the dog up on the laptop screen or the TV screen, turn all the lights off, put your paper over the top, and you can just sketch around it. Here I've noticed that I haven't filled in all of the lines from my tracing. So what I'm doing is just filling in some of the blanks, just looking at the laptop screen and making sure I've outlined where there are dark areas. So with watercolour, as soon as you go over pencil with watercolour or water, it fixes the pencil so that you cannot lift it off with an eraser or a rubber. So you have to be quite careful where you're putting the pencil down. Only do it where you've got quite black areas, because otherwise the pencil will show through. So what you can see me doing here is coating the darkest areas with water using my bigger brush. I am going over some of the what will be the lighter areas as well. But even the lighter areas, the white is not going to be completely white. So that's why I've gone over some of the whiter areas with the water. What will happen when I start applying the colour in a minute, you'll see that the colour spreads out as far as the confines of the water that I've just put down. So it can create a hard edge on some aspects, and then I can get a soft edge on the other sides where, for example, the dark hair goes into the white hair. There's a much softer line on the photo, so I want to represent that. So the colour that I'm mixing up here, although the dog is actually a black and white dog, you don't find black in real life. So I'm mixing up a dark colour resembling black using burnt sienna and ultramarine, and that gives a very dark kind of colour, as you can see here. And I do that throughout, so I don't mind if the colour slightly changes. Sometimes it's a bluey black, sometimes it's a browny black. I'm trying to mix up quite a lot here, so I don't have to keep mixing up colours, but I inevitably do. So I'm just applying it with my bigger brush. I use the big brush as bigger as I can go, as big as I can go for the bigger areas, because I don't want to faff around with a tiny brush doing little hairs. You don't need to do that, not unless you're doing hyperrealism, and that's not what I do. So as you can see here, the colour is spreading out into the confines of where I've actually wet the paper. So on the left hand side there's a crisp line where the colour's spread out as far as it can, whereas on the right hand side there's actually a line of white that runs up the dog's nose all the way up its forehead, and I haven't really wanted to go up there, but it's not completely crisp white, so all I've done is just left that little bit without painting over it, and the colour that I'm applying is sort of merging in to create a soft line. So when you're doing watercolour, it's all about knowing where you want to have your soft lines and your hard lines, and you can use the photo for that. Where there's hairy areas, usually it's a little bit of a softer line. The outside of a dog's head is usually harder because you've got, unless it's merging into the background, you do see the outline of the head quite well. So you can see I've actually gone over some of the white areas a bit too much. So what I'm doing here, I'm lifting off the colour. So I've got my big brush, which I've wet, and then I've dried with my paper towel, and then I'm just using it to stroke up the paper to soak up any colour that I've added. And now I'm doing it with my smaller brush because that soaks up a little bit better. The other thing you can do is if you want to preserve more of the white or the colour that's underneath, at least, you can use a paper towel and just dab that on the surface. Don't scrub. If you dab it, then it will soak up some of the colour into the paper towel, and that will help you get some of your whites back. What I'm doing here is I'm adding a bit of a more concentrated colour. So I've just mixed up more of that burnt sienna, more of the ultramarine blue to give me a darker black colour, and I'm just dabbing it in. And the effect that has there, as you can see, is it just sort of merges out. I don't want any hard lines here, apart from where I want them to on the outside of the dog, the silhouette of the dog. I don't want any hard lines on the softer side of the dog because he hasn't got any. Here, I do want a bit of a harder line actually on his nose, where the nose comes out. He's got a white nose with some grey markings on. I did want more of a line there, and in a minute I think I'll notice that and mop that up with the paper towel. So yes, it's a good technique. Whilst things are still wet, you can just daub colour in rather than waiting for your painting to dry, which is the other technique, and just doing lots of different layers to build up colour. I prefer to do it with this daubing in sort of technique because of the lack of patience that I have. So I'm using my little brush now because it's more detailed work. Where there's a line, where I end up painting somewhere, like that nose just there, it had a harder line than I wanted it to because I hadn't wet the paper first. And if you do want a softer line, then before that paint has a minute to dry, you have to wet your brush with clean water, and then you can just stroke the outside of where you've applied the colour, and the colour will merge into that space where the water you've just applied is, so it'll create a softer line. So there, I think I said earlier, I'm just wanting to soak up some of that the dark that's gone over the nose. Now usually my strategy for painting people and animals is to do the eyes towards the end, so all of my paintings tend to look a little bit creepy until the end. Unfortunately, I don't think there's a right or a wrong way of doing any of this, but this is the way I like to do it. And where I want more of the white to come through, like you can see there, I was just using some of the paper towel to mop that up. And really, the rest of the painting is much of a muchness. It's all about just building up colour. There you can see my cat. He's helping. It can always be a bit of a challenge to paint when you've got a cat headbutting your arm as you're painting. So there's a limit to how much you can do with the paper still wet. So at some point, I will want crisp lines. So at that point, I use a hairdryer usually to just dry the paper off, so I can get crisp lines. But you can see I sort of jump around the painting a little bit, because where, I might have applied the colour on the left-hand side by the ear, at some point it's, I'll wait for that to dry and then I'll concentrate on the right ear, for example, or I'll concentrate on one of the eyes, or so it might look a bit unstrategic, but there is a method to my madness, because it's all about sort of making sure that things are drying and I can work on something else and be productive at the same time. When I've finished all I can do, because I want to have crisp lines from now on, or darker colours, then I use the hairdryer, as you can see I'm doing here. Some people prefer to leave it to dry naturally, because the hairdryer does have this tendency to push the colour out. So you need to watch out for that. Make sure that you're not using the hairdryer if there's any big pools of paint, water, because it will make more of a mess. So here you can see that I've added a bit of violet to the mix. So I've still got my burnt sienna, ultramarine, and I've added a little bit of violet just to give it a bit of variation. And I'm applying this to the areas I want really dark. So there is quite a hard line by the dog's forehead, which I'm just doing there. I haven't added any water underneath at the moment because I want a really concentrated colour. When you apply water first and do this wet on wet technique that I was doing earlier, it has this tendency to sort of not dull down the colours, but they're a more diluted version of the colour. So when I'm doing the next layers, then I tend to go with a non-wet on wet approach. I do a wet on dry, and now where I want a soft line, then I'll make sure that I'm using a paintbrush that is clean and a little bit wet, and I'll just stroke the outline. Don't use a clean wet brush to stroke the sides of your painting down, like where you've applied a strong concentrated colour. You shouldn't apply a more diluted colour, or just clear water, because that will run into the paint and it'll create weird effects. So you need to be quite careful that you're always, if you're messing around with something that's already wet, like a wet paint, always make sure that you're adding a more concentrated version of the colour, or any colour. It just needs to be more concentrated. If it's more watery, then it'll create a cauliflower effect. So really, that's the bulk of the painting. It's all about adding more and more layers until you get to the contrast that you want and the values that you want. Try and match that up to the photograph that you're using. A good technique to make sure that the contrast is right is to turn the photo that you're using into a black and white photo, and every now and then take pictures of your painting, turn that into a black and white photo, and then they should be similar. The dark should be as dark on your painting as they are on the photo, and the light should be as light as the lights on your photo. So it's just a case of building up the colour, making sure that the hard lines are hard, making sure that the soft lines are soft, and that's about it really. It's not it's not rocket science. So I'll speed this along a bit, otherwise I think that you're going to get bored. And I might join you for the eyes in a minute. Okay, so you can see what I've done. I've just added more darker areas where there are darker areas. Around the hair, hairy ears, I've just added a bit more hair. What I'm doing for the eyes, it's a bit tricky because the picture of the dog, the original photo, he's looking in a different place, and I wanted him looking at the directly out at the viewer, as it were. So I just need to change the eyes a little bit. I'm using yellow ochre as the background, as the irises. And I've made sure I'm adding that colour to a dry surrounding area, otherwise that the yellow ochre is going to leak into the other colours and potentially cause problems. So, I'll hop around to other areas now because I want the eyes to dry before I start adding the pupils. So the painting is almost finished. I'm just adding some hairs, just using the fine corner of my paintbrush, particularly around the ruffles around the neck. Just need to sort out the eyes a little bit more, and then I use a gel pen often just to add a little bit of highlight on the eyes to give them a bit more sparkle. Sometimes use white gouache as well to do that. I actually do add in use some white gouache for the collar, which I left out in the original sketch. So almost done. Just these finishing touches. So I'm going to thank you now for watching the video. If you've managed to make it up this far, very much appreciated. Well done. And if you've got any suggestions or ideas for future videos, then please do let me know. And if you could please like and subscribe, that would be a great help for me. Thank you very much, and see you next time. Thanks.